Have you ever wondered how people slept in the Middle Ages? Their methods are certainly shocking. Many of us cannot even imagine what people had to go through for what might seem like a simple need. Modern films and novels paint a picture of medieval castles as places of harsh but majestic romance. We imagine lords and ladies sleeping in huge four-poster beds, listening to the crackling of logs in the fireplace. But what if I told you that this picture is just a beautiful illusion hiding a cruel truth? A night in a medieval castle was not a rest, but a nightly struggle for survival. It was a battle against the bitter cold, darkness, and conditions that modern people would find unbearable. Watch the video to the end to find out why the most expensive bed in the castle was designed as a separate room and what simple household item was valued more than the bed itself. What if I told you that everything you believed about life in a castle was untrue? The romantic image of a great hall with feasting nights often ends with a scene where everyone falls asleep peacefully by the fire. The reality was quite different. For the vast majority of the castle's inhabitants, servants, soldiers, squires, and low-ranking guests, this hall was their shared bedroom. It was a huge, echoing, drafty room, not a cozy nest at all. There was no privacy here. Dozens of people slept side by side on the floor. The main source of heat and light was the central hearth, often simply a stone recess in the middle of the hall. The smoke from this fire rose upwards but did not always escape effectively through the opening in the roof. As a result, the air in the hall was heavy and acrid, saturated with smoke, soot, and the smells of cooking. People slept while inhaling these fumes, which was not only unpleasant but also harmful to their health. The floor served as a place to sleep. At best, armfuls of straw or reeds were thrown on it to soften the stone surface somewhat. These bedding materials were rarely changed, turning into a breeding ground for dirt and waste. People lay down directly on this improvised bedding, covering themselves with their own cloaks or coarse woolen blankets. Sleep in such conditions was restless and intermittent. The hall was never completely quiet. Someone snored, someone talked in their sleep, someone got up to throw wood into the hearth. In addition, the hall was a passageway, and night guard duties or the arrival of a late guest disturbed the general peace. It was more of a collective camp than a place to rest. The hierarchy was observed even in sleep. The most honorable places were closer to the hearth, where it was warmer. However, this was a double-edged sword. Proximity to the fire saved you from the cold, but meant even more smoke and the risk of getting a spark on your blanket. Those lower on the social ladder huddled against the walls where the drafts were strongest. The drafts were a real curse of the Great Hall. Huge, poorly fitted wooden gates and narrow, unglazed loophole windows let in the icy wind. People wrapped themselves in everything they had, trying to retain what little warmth they had. Sleep was shallow, and waking up was often accompanied by a feeling of complete exhaustion and cold that penetrated to the bone. The only shelter from this chaos was a folding wooden screen or partition. Those who could afford it fenced off their small corner. This gave the illusion of privacy and provided some protection from the drafts, but it did not solve the problem. Most people were deprived of even this modest luxury. In the morning, the hall quickly transformed back into a place for work and meals. Straw mattresses, if there were any, were rolled up and stored against the walls. People got up from the cold floor and brushed soot and debris off their clothes. There was no question of proper rest in such conditions. It was only a temporary respite before a new day. This practice of sleeping in a common hall continued throughout most of the Middle Ages. Only in the late period, with the development of architecture and the pursuit of comfort, did the nobility begin to separate themselves from their servants. But for the garrison and the servants, the Great Hall remained the only available shelter for the night. Thus, for most of the castle's inhabitants, the night was simply a continuation of the daytime struggle for survival. It was a test of endurance, not a time to recover. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about this contrast between the cinematic image and reality? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the Lord of the Castle slept? Of course, the Lord and his family were in a more privileged position. They had a separate room, often called the Solar, or simply the Great Chamber. This room was usually located on the top floor, above the Great Hall, which had a strategic advantage. This location made the room warmer, as the heat from the hall rose and warmed the stone floor. The emergence of such a separate room was a real revolution in the concept of privacy. It was a luxury that was inaccessible to the vast majority of the population. Here, the Lord could retreat with his family, away from the hustle and bustle of the common hall. However, our modern understanding of privacy is very different from that of the Middle Ages. Even in this private room, lords and ladies rarely remained alone. Their personal servants slept by the walls and armed guards could stand at the doors. The ladies of the ladies' retinue often slept in the same room, on small beds or directly on chests. This was done both for security reasons and to serve their masters at the first call. The room's furnishings were functional but luxurious by the standards of the time. The bed, which we will discuss separately, occupied the central place. In addition to the bed, the room contained massive wooden chests, which served both as storage for clothing and as benches. There might also have been a table and several chairs for personal use. The room was still poorly lit. The windows were small, often without glass, covered with oiled cloth or parchment, or closed with wooden shutters. Beeswax candles, unlike smoky and foul-smelling tallow candles, were an expensive luxury. They were used sparingly, and most of the time the room was plunged into semi-darkness. The greatest convenience that distinguished the Lord's chambers was often the presence of his own wardrobe. This was not a closet for clothes, but a medieval toilet. It was a small niche in the thickness of the wall, protruding outside the castle. Waste fell down into a moat or a special cesspool, eliminating the need for a chamber pot. Despite this, the smells in the room were still strong. The smell of smoke, unwashed bodies, and waste lingered in the cracks of the stone walls and wooden furniture. To combat this, aromatic herbs such as mint, lavender, and rosemary were scattered on the floor. This helped, but only partially masked the overall atmosphere. Heating was also a problem. Unlike the central hearth in the hall, the Lord's chambers might have a wall-mounted fireplace. This was a more progressive solution, as the smoke went up the chimney. However, such fireplaces were extremely inefficient. Most of the heat escaped up the chimney, and while it was hot near the fire itself, it was cold a few feet away. The floor in the Lord's room was no longer bare stone covered with dirty straw. It could be covered with wooden planks, which was warmer. The richest feudal lords allowed themselves the luxury of carpets brought from the east. But most often, mats made of reeds or the same armfuls of fresh grass were used. Thus, the Lord's bedroom was a step towards comfort, but it was still far from our idea of coziness. It was a cold, dimly lit, and not always private place. But even in this private room, the main secret was hidden in the bed itself. Are you ready to find out why it was not just a piece of furniture, but a real fortress? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of medieval bedrooms. When we imagine a medieval bed, we see a massive structure with 4 posts and a canopy. This was not a designer's whim or a simple decoration. This design was a brilliant engineering solution dictated by the harsh necessity of survival in a cold castle. The Lord's bed was essentially a room within a room. 4 posts at the corners supported a wooden roof, or canopy. This roof served an important function. It protected sleepers from dust, debris, and even small stones that might fall from the ceiling. In old castles, ceilings often leaked or crumbled, and such a roof over one's head was not a luxury, but a protection. The most important element was the heavy, thick curtains that hung on all 4 sides. At night, they were drawn tightly, creating a completely enclosed space. These curtains, often made of heavy wool or velvet, were the main protection against drafts. Inside this box, the warmth from the breath of the sleepers was retained much more effectively. Inside this enclosed space, the temperature could be several degrees higher than in the rest of the room. In an icy bedroom, where the walls were cold and the wind blew through the windows, such a microclimate was the only chance to keep warm. The curtains also provided a sense of seclusion and privacy in a room where servants often slept. The bed itself was very high. It was often necessary to use a special stool to climb onto it. This was not done for aesthetic reasons. Firstly, it distanced the sleeper from the cold stone floor, where the strongest drafts blew. The higher you slept, the warmer the air around you was. Secondly, the space under the bed was not empty. Chests with valuable items were often stored there. In later periods, a so-called truckle bed was placed under the master's bed. It was a low bed on wheels where a personal servant or squire slept, ready to come to the master's aid at any moment. The bed frame itself was massive, made of oak or other durable wood. It was not just a piece of furniture, but an investment. Such beds cost a fortune and were decorated with intricate carvings, inlays, and even gilding. They were a status symbol and were passed down as a family heirloom. The base on which the mattress lay was also far from modern. Instead of springs or slats, a dense mesh of ropes or leather straps was used. These ropes were stretched tightly crosswise. Over time, they sagged and had to be regularly tightened with a special key to keep the bed firm. This design was so valuable that lords often took it with them. When a feudal lord moved from one castle to another, the bed was dismantled and transported along with the rest of the household goods. Servants reassembled it at the new location. This proves that the bed was not just an interior decoration, but a vital tool for sleeping. We can see that the medieval bed was a complex and multifunctional device. It protected against the cold, drafts, falling debris, and provided the illusion of privacy. This complex construction was a real engineering solution, but it was useless without the main thing. If you found this fact interesting, please like this video. And be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to learn more about how people survived in the Middle Ages. What if everything you've been taught about comfort is outdated? We figured out the bed frame, but what did people sleep on? The word mattress had a completely different meaning in the Middle Ages. For the vast majority of the population who slept in the Great Hall, a mattress was simply a canvas bag stuffed with straw or hay. It was cheap, affordable, but extremely uncomfortable. The straw quickly became matted, stiff, and poked through the fabric. It absorbed moisture and odors and became a haven for small insects. People tried to change the filling as often as possible, but as often as possible could mean once every few months or even less. Sleeping on such a mattress was little better than sleeping on the bare floor. Even lords and ladies in their luxurious beds did not always sleep on soft mattresses. Their mattresses were also stuffed. However, more expensive materials could be used as filling. For example, horsehair, which was more elastic and durable than straw. Wool was also used, which provided additional warmth. The most luxurious, but also the most expensive filling was down and feathers. Only the wealthiest feudal lords could afford a real feather bed. Such a mattress was incredibly soft and warm, but required constant care. It had to be regularly beaten, aired, and restuffed so that the feathers did not clump together. A multi-layer system was often used. First, a hard straw mattress was placed on the rope base of the bed. It served as a base. On top of it, a softer and more expensive mattress was laid, wool or feather. This created a more comfortable and warmer surface for sleeping. The hygiene of these mattresses was a big problem. There was no concept of regular washing or cleaning. Mattresses were aired out and dusted, but it was impossible to completely get rid of the odors and dirt that had accumulated over the years. The fabric used to make the covers was coarse, canvas or linen. The process of stuffing a mattress was a separate matter. Periodically, the old filling was shaken out. Then the cover was cleaned as much as possible and stuffed with fresh material. Fresh, dry straw was considered a great blessing. But over time, it inevitably turned into dusty and hard chaff. To a modern person, such sleep would seem like torture. A hard, uneven surface, questionable cleanliness, and a constant struggle with the filling clumping together. The concept of orthopedic comfort was something out of the realm of fantasy. The main purpose of the mattress was not comfort, but insulation from the cold bed base. Moreover, mattresses were valuable property. Like the beds themselves, they were mentioned in wills and passed down through generations. The fact that a family had a separate mattress, even one stuffed with straw, was already a sign of a certain level of wealth. The poor slept on a pile of straw without any cover. Thus, even in the Lord's chambers, the softness of the bed was relative. It was a constant struggle with materials that were not designed for comfort as we understand it. But even the best mattress did not save from the cold. In the next chapter, you will learn how people actually kept warm in icy stone rooms. After climbing onto their hard mattresses and drawing the thick bed curtains, medieval aristocrats needed a final line of defense against the cold. This came in the form of bedding and blankets. What they used to cover themselves also strictly corresponded to their social status. Sheets, for example, were a luxury that was not available to everyone. The simplest and cheapest sheets were made of coarse, unbleached linen or hemp. They were rough and scratchy, but they served a hygienic purpose. They were easier to wash than the mattress or blanket itself. Wealthier people could afford sheets made of thin, bleached linen, which was softer and more pleasant to the body. Cotton was rare and expensive in Europe. Blankets were the main means of keeping warm. They were made of wool, the most affordable and warmest material. The quality of wool could vary from coarse cloth to finer and softer fabrics. Wool blankets were heavy, dense, and excellent at retaining heat. They were often quilted with several layers of fabric stitched together for greater insulation. However, wool was not the only option. Fur was the height of luxury and a symbol of high status. A lord's bed was often covered with fur blankets. Wolf, bear, fox, and beaver furs were used. The more expensive and rare the fur, the higher the status of the owner. These fur blankets were incredibly warm, but also very heavy. Sleeping under the weight of several woolen blankets and a fur blanket was physically difficult. It was nothing like our light-down comforters. Sleeping under such weight was more like being under oppression, but it was the only way to stay warm in the bitter cold of a stone bedroom. People slept almost motionless. Washing these items was a huge problem. Wool blankets and fur bedspreads were almost never washed in the sense that we understand it. They were beaten, cleaned with brushes, and aired in the sun to get rid of odors and insects. Sheets were washed much more often using lye, a caustic solution made from wood ash. In wealthy homes, there was the concept of a bed wardrobe. Dozens of sheets, pillowcases, and bedspreads were stored in chests. This was necessary because the process of washing and drying took a very long time. Having a spare set of linens was a sign of wealth and concern for hygiene. For extra warmth, people often slept fully clothed. Pajamas as such did not exist. People slept either in their daytime shirts or in special long linen nightgowns. Many also wore woolen stockings and a special nightcap at night. The nightcap was important because a lot of heat was lost through the head. The color of bedding was most often natural, gray or beige. Bleaching linen was a difficult and expensive process. Bright colors for blankets and bedspreads were achieved with natural dyes and were also expensive. Bedspreads were often decorated with embroidery depicting the family crest or hunting scenes. Thus, the bedding system was multi-layered. First came a linen sheet, then several heavy woolen blankets, and the crowning glory was a massive fur or quilted bedspread. Each layer added not only warmth but also weight, turning sleep into immobile confinement in a cocoon of fabric and fur. Are you ready for the shocking truth about castle fireplaces? We instinctively imagine a bedroom with a large roaring fireplace. However, wall-mounted fireplaces, as we know them, did not appear in living quarters until relatively late, and even then, they were terribly inefficient. The stone from which the castle was built was an ideal accumulator of cold. The problem with the fireplace was its design. The huge open firebox and wide chimney acted like a pump. They sucked warm air out of the room and replaced it with icy air from outside through the cracks in the windows and doors. As a result, it was unbearably hot right next to the fire, but a few steps away it was freezing cold. Most of the heat simply escaped up the chimney. To achieve any effect at all, the fireplace had to be kept burning constantly, which required an incredible amount of firewood. Supplying the castle with fuel was a separate and very complex logistical task. Firewood was a valuable resource and was used sparingly. Therefore, the fireplace in the bedroom was not lit constantly. It could be lit in the evening to warm up the room a little before bedtime, but leaving it burning all night was wasteful and dangerous. By morning, the room was completely cold again. The stone walls, several meters thick, froze through and gave off cold inside. More local and effective methods were used to combat this cold. The most common was the use of bed warmers. These were metal, usually copper or brass. Vessels with a long handle, similar to a frying pan with a lid. Hot coals from the fireplace were placed inside such a warmer. Before the lord and lady went to bed, a servant would take the warmer and run it between the sheets. The hot metal heated the fabric, warming the bed and removing moisture. This was very effective, but also dangerous. The servant had to constantly move the warmer so that the hot coals did not burn the expensive bedding. Another simpler method was to use hot stones or bricks. They were heated in the fireplace and then wrapped tightly in several layers of fabric. These bundles were placed at the foot of the bed. They slowly gave off heat for several hours, allowing people to warm up and fall asleep. It was a safe and affordable way of providing local heating. People also used the warmth of their own bodies. Several people often slept in the same bed. Parents slept with their young children not only because of lack of space, but also to keep each other warm. Personal servants who slept on a rollaway bed at the foot of their master's beds also added a little warmth to the shared space. The floor in the bedroom was also freezing cold. Stepping barefoot onto the stone floor was torture. That is why there were always small rugs or animal skins lying by the bed. Bedroom shoes were also common, soft slippers without backs, which were put on immediately after waking up. All nightlife was subordinated to one goal: to stay warm. People moved less and wrapped themselves more tightly in blankets. Even the architecture of the castle, with its thick walls and small windows, was primarily a means of passive defense, not only against enemies, but also against the cold. We see that the battle against the cold was constant and fought on all fronts. The fireplace was more a status symbol than a real heater. Real warmth was achieved locally with the help of hot water bottles, hot stones, and heavy blankets. But how did they find their way in this cold darkness? Night in a medieval castle was not just dark, it was pitch black. Without street lighting or electricity, the only sources of light were the moon, the stars, and fire. This all-consuming darkness dictated the entire rhythm of life. People lived according to the sun. They went to bed shortly after sunset and rose with the first rays of dawn. Moving around the castle at night was dangerous. Uneven stone floors, steep spiral staircases, and unexpected steps all turned into an obstacle course in the dark. An accidental fall could lead to serious injury. Therefore, no one walked at night unless absolutely necessary. The main source of artificial light was candles. However, there were two completely different types. Most of the population used tallow candles. They were made from animal fat, most often sheep or beef. These candles were cheap, but they burned unevenly, smoked heavily, and emitted a disgusting smell of rancid fat. The aristocracy in the church could afford beeswax candles. These were a real luxury. Wax candles burned brightly and evenly, produced almost no smoke, and smelled pleasantly of honey. They were incredibly expensive, and their use was strictly controlled. The Lord's bedroom was lit with such candles, but even so, people tried to use them sparingly. A cheaper alternative to candles were splinters, thin pieces of dry wood. They were inserted into special holders on the walls. Splinters gave off a dim, flickering light and burned out quickly, requiring constant replacement. Lamps were also used, small bowls filled with animal fat or oil into which a wick was dipped. They smoked even more than tallow candles. Rushlights were particularly popular. These were dried reed stems soaked in melted fat. Such candles were very cheap to produce. They gave enough light to see in the immediate vicinity, but they had to be constantly repositioned in the holder as they burned down. The main danger of any open flame was fire. Although castles were built of stone, they had many wooden elements: roofs, beams, floors, furniture, tapestries. A spark from the fireplace, a fallen candle, or a carelessly left splinter could lead to disaster. Fire spread through wooden structures at tremendous speed. Therefore, there was a strict rule in the castle called curfew. This word comes from the French couvre-feu, which means cover the fire. In the evening, at the signal of a bell, all residents had to extinguish their hearths and candles. This was a fire safety measure. In the Lord's bedroom, the fire could burn longer, but even there it was carefully monitored. Lanterns were used for nighttime travel. These were not glass lanterns, but horn lanterns, where thin polished plates of ox horn were inserted instead of glass. They protected the candle flame from the wind and were safer than an open torch, which people tried not to use in living quarters because of the smoke and risk of fire. Thus, night was a time of darkness and fear. Light was expensive, dangerous, and dim. People spent long hours in darkness, waiting for dawn. This darkness also affected their psychological state, making the castle an even more mysterious and sinister place. One of the most shocking aspects of life in a castle for a modern person is the smells. We are used to sterility, but the medieval world was filled with strong, pungent, and not always pleasant aromas. The Lord's bedroom, despite its status, was no exception. The lack of regular hygiene and specific cleaning methods created a unique atmosphere. Personal hygiene was not a frequent occurrence. Taking a hot bath was quite an event. It required bringing and heating a huge amount of water over a fire, which was very labor-intensive. A lord could afford to bathe in a wooden tub, but this did not happen every day. Hygiene mainly consisted of washing one's face and hands in the morning. Accordingly, body odors were commonplace. People slept in their undergarments, which were rarely changed. Added to this was the smell of smoke from the fireplace or candles, which clung to fabrics and hair. This was the norm, and people at that time were much less sensitive to such things. Waste disposal was a major problem. The Lord's bedroom had a chamber pot, often richly decorated, but essentially just a container for waste. In the morning, a servant had to take it out. At best, the contents were poured into the wardrobe. At worst, simply into the castle courtyard. The wardrobe, or medieval toilet, was itself a source of odor. Although it was built into the wall with an exit to the outside, in warm weather or when the wind blew in a certain direction, the smell from the shaft would seep back into the room. It was an inevitable evil that had to be put up with. Cleaning the rooms was also specific. Stone or wooden floors were not washed with water. Instead, they were sprinkled with fresh herbs and reeds. This was called strewing herbs. Lavender, mint, chamomile, and thyme were used. The idea was that when people walked on the herbs, they would crush them and release a pleasant aroma that would mask other odors. In practice, this did not work well. The layer of old herbs was not always removed, but simply covered with fresh ones. Dust, dirt, food scraps, and other debris accumulated in this bottom layer. This rotting mass itself became a source of unpleasant odors. Only periodically, during general cleaning, was this entire layer raked out and replaced. There were many animals in the castle, and although they tried not to let them into the Lord's bedroom, this rule was not always followed. Hunting dogs often slept at their master's feet. Their smell also mingled with the general palette of aromas. This closeness to animals was the norm. Heavy bed curtains, tapestries on the walls, fur bedspreads. All these fabrics absorbed odors like a sponge. They were cleaned by beating out the dust but never fully washed. Over time, they acquired a persistent, heavy smell consisting of smoke, sweat, dust, and aromatic herbs. To combat this, pomanders were used, small balls of aromatic resins, herbs, and spices that were carried on the body or placed around the room. Ladies used perfumes based on floral oils. But all this was just a cover-up, an attempt to mask the ubiquitous smells of medieval life. The Lord's bedroom was far from being a clean and fresh room. It was a place where dozens of smells mingled, from expensive incense to dampness and filth. For us, it would be unbearable, but for a person of that era, it was simply the smell of home. Sleep in a medieval castle was not only cold and dark, but also very noisy. Modern people are accustomed to the steady hum of the city, the rustle of cars, distant voices, and the sound of footsteps behind the wall. But the sounds of the castle were completely different. Lively, wild, often disturbing. They seemed to be part of the stone itself, as if the walls breathed and whispered at night. The stone arches did not muffle the noise, but rather amplified it, turning every echo into a roll of thunder. Any rustle could sound ominous, and sleep became a real challenge. The main source of noise was the wind. It howled in the chimneys, crept through the cracks, and whistled in the loopholes as if someone were trying to get inside. In the narrow corridors, the wind howled so loudly that it seemed as if the castle itself was groaning from the cold. Poorly fitted wooden shutters and doors slammed, shook, and creaked, causing people to jump in surprise. Sometimes, due to a strong storm, The walls shook and the fireplaces smoked, filling the rooms with smoke. On such nights, it was almost impossible to fall asleep. It seemed as if nature itself was knocking at the gate. The second constant source of sound was the castle's materials themselves. The huge beams, gates, and floorboards were alive. They responded to every change in temperature. When the fire in the fireplace died down, the wood contracted and began to crackle. At night, these sounds became especially loud, turning the silence into a chorus of invisible voices. The damp air amplified the creaking, and it seemed as if someone was walking up the stairs. People often attributed such sounds to spirits or ancestors, believing that the castle was talking to them. The castle never slept completely. It was not just a house, but a fortress where life was bustling even at night. Guards patrolled the walls, climbing the towers to survey the surroundings. The loudest sound was the cry of the sentry, which echoed off the walls. Every hour, or even more often, the silence was broken by a confident, "All is quiet." This cry woke the dogs, which began to bark, adding to the noise of the night chorus. Even the most tired residents woke up to this loud signal. Periodically, the silence was broken by the clang of metal. It could be guards changing shifts or soldiers checking their weapons. Their footsteps on the stone slabs of the courtyard echoed in the corridors. In the darkness, you could hear the clanging of swords, the sound of shields hitting the wall, and the clanking of chainmail. Sometimes the grooms took the horses out for a night check, and the pounding of hooves echoed through the courtyard. This rumbling could reach the bedrooms, causing people to roll over, hoping to sleep for at least a minute. Church bells were another sleep disturber. They ruled the entire routine of life, reminding people of prayers and services. At night, the monks rose for matins, and their bells rang even through the storm. In large castles, the bell could stand right in the courtyard, and its ringing penetrated every room. Sometimes the sounds merged with the wind, creating a feeling of endless humming. People perceived this noise as part of life, because it reminded them of faith and order. The castle courtyard woke up before dawn. With the first glimmers of light, the grooms appeared in the courtyard, shoeing horses and cleaning stalls. The sound of a hammer striking an anvil came from the smithy, and the crackling of fire and the clatter of knives on wood came from the kitchen. Servants carried buckets of water, slammed doors, and all this cacophony filled the space. Even if the Lord wanted to sleep longer, he heard every sound. The castle woke up instantly, and the silence disappeared until the next night. The servants who slept in the same room as the Lord were not silent either. They tossed and turned, talked quietly in their sleep, or coughed in the cold air. Everyone breathed loudly. The stone walls reflected even their breath. Sometimes someone would get up to throw wood on the fire, and the creaking of the floor would disturb the peace. Snoring was a common sound at night, as was the crackling of coals. Even in the chambers of the nobility, there was no privacy. Sounds and people surrounded the master constantly. This constant noise was part of the castle's defense system. Any unusual sound instantly alerted everyone. If a guard did not shout his phrase in time, everyone understood that something was wrong. The slightest creak, clang, or silence could mean danger. Castle dwellers learned to sleep alertly, like animals in the wild. Their ears could distinguish between footsteps on stone and the rustling of a rat, and this skill often saved their lives. Sleep was shallow and intermittent. People often woke up at night from the cold, noise, or body aches after a hard day. To keep warm, they had to wrap themselves in several layers of wool or fur blankets. The idea of 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep did not exist at that time. People slept in 2 segments. The first sleep lasted until midnight, then they woke up, prayed, talked, or ate, and only then fell asleep again. This rhythm seemed natural in a world where the night was long and the day began long before dawn.
And keep us safe.
The last aspect that destroys the romantic myth is the complete lack of privacy. Night was the most vulnerable time for the lord of the castle because it was during sleep that a person became defenseless. Even the most powerful lord depended on those who were close to him at that moment. The threat could come from outside through a secret tunnel or siege, or from within, from courtiers, servants, or relatives hungry for power. Therefore, the sleep of a noble person was under constant control and guard. The Lord did not go to bed without being sure that every corner of the room and every door was under surveillance. As we have already mentioned, servants were almost always present in the bedroom of a lord and lady. Their presence was not just a habit, but a necessity. For a lady, this could be one or more ladies-in-waiting who helped her with dressing, combing her hair, and prayers before bed. The Lord had a squire or personal valet who was required to be nearby at all times in case an alarm sounded. They slept on the simple mattresses, benches, or even at the doorstep so that they would be the first to hear footsteps. Their role was twofold, to serve and to protect, because it was often the servant who was the first to stand between his master and danger. The presence of these people was the absolute norm and was perceived as part of the order of things. The concept of personal space at that time was nothing like modern privacy. Lords and ladies lived in full view of their entourage. They ate, changed clothes, argued, and even prayed in their presence. This was not considered humiliating. On the contrary, it demonstrated high status. The more people surrounded the master, the higher his position seemed. The constant presence of servants was an indicator of power, because a lone ruler aroused suspicion rather than respect. Armed guards stood watch outside the bedroom doors. These men were not just soldiers, but a personal guard, chosen for their loyalty and devotion. They served in shifts, sometimes staying awake for 2 days listening to every sound. They always had swords or spears in their hands, and their armor stood nearby, ready to be put on in a matter of seconds. They controlled the corridors and made sure that no outsiders approached the chambers. The Lord fell asleep knowing that just a few steps away were those who were ready to die for his safety. The Lord's bedroom itself often had political significance. Meetings, discussions, and even official ceremonies were held there. In France and England, it was common practice to receive guests directly in bed. This was not considered a breach of decorum. On the contrary, it was a sign of trust. If a vassal was invited to his lord's bedchamber, it meant special favor. Sometimes a lord, without getting up, signed documents or listened to ambassadors, turning the bedroom into a center of power. Thus, even rest became part of the diplomatic performance. The process of going to sleep was a whole ritual, almost a performance, in which everyone had their own role. Servants removed the Lord's heavy clothes and brought him soft shirts and fur capes. Ladies helped him braid his hair or remove his jewelry. After that, one of the servants lit the candles, another arranged the pillows, and a third checked the locks and shutters. Before going to sleep, the Lord and Lady could pray, and only then did the servants leave the room or lie down to sleep by the door. This process emphasized hierarchy and dependence. Even the sleep of the nobility was not a private matter. In the morning, waking up was just as public and ritualistic. With the first rays of the sun, servants entered the chambers and pulled back the heavy curtains to let in the light. They lit the fireplace, brought a basin of water for washing, and helped their masters get dressed. In some castles, a light breakfast was already being served at this time. While the Lord put on his doublet or boots, his valet informed him of the news and the plan for the day. The first hour of the new morning turned into a meeting. Even the moment of awakening was a time for business and decisions. Even married life was not completely hidden from prying eyes. The bed curtains served more as a symbolic barrier than a real barrier. Servants sleeping nearby heard every word and movement. It was part of everyday life, and no one felt ashamed of it. Privacy and personal life simply did not exist, because even marital relations were considered a duty to the family and the dynasty. Silence and secrets were rare in a world where walls had ears and every step had witnesses. This constant life in the spotlight, even during sleep, was one of the most difficult psychological burdens. The Lord could not allow himself to relax, because any sign of weakness could be noticed. Even at night, he remained what he was during the day: a master, a judge, a commander. His body rested, but his mind continued to work, listening, remembering, and evaluating. Being constantly in the public eye meant living in a state of perpetual readiness. This was one of the most exhausting aspects of power. Thus, night in the castle was not a time of rest, but a continuation of daytime life, only in a different light. It did not bring silence and comfort, but reminded one of duty, responsibility, and danger. The romantic aura dissipates when we realize that the sleep of noble people was cold, smoky, and public. Stone walls, guards, Rustling sounds and the glances of those around them made peace an illusion. Even rest required strength of spirit and caution. Sleep in the castle was not rest, but another task for survival. We have traveled from the smoky common hall to the Lord's private chambers and seen that sleep in the Middle Ages was not rest, but a real test. The cruel truth is that the castle, being a fortress against enemies, was itself hostile to its inhabitants. The cold stone, piercing drafts, smoke, lack of hygiene, and complete lack of privacy. This is the true picture of a night in a medieval castle. A four-poster bed was not a luxury, but an engineering solution for survival. A small fortress within a large one. A hot water bottle with coals was valued more than a fireplace, and a heavy fur blanket was the last line of defense. People of that time were forced to adapt to conditions that seem not only uncomfortable, but unbearable to us today. This era teaches us to appreciate the comforts we take for granted. A warm bed, a quiet room, clean air, and most importantly, privacy. The romance of the Middle Ages is largely a myth created centuries later. The reality was much harsher. What else from the era of survival in the Middle Ages would you like to see in future videos? Perhaps you are interested in the truth about medieval medicine or how night tournaments actually took place? Suggest topics in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the past.